Work is all around us. It defines us. And the future of work impacts nearly every person on our planet. The ILR School at Cornell University is at the center of work, labor, and employment, influencing policy and practice on the most pressing issues facing employees and employers. ILR School Dean Alex Colvin is the host of our series, Work, exploring the future of work, labor, and employment, featuring discussion with experts on key world of work topics. In this episode, New York State Assemblyman Sean Ryan and Dean Colvin discuss the future of work in Buffalo.
It strikes me that Buffalo is a place, you see that enormous sweep of kind of American economic history, right? When I go there, I think back to, when the Erie Canal, came in and that kind of, boom of the 19th century. And, I was just looking at a table of the 10 biggest American cities decade by decade. And there was a period when Buffalo was in there, right? When Buffalo was the 10 biggest American cities, and sort of really booming through the 20th century. But then, then got hit hard with the, the shifts that happened in manufacturing and the decline there, posing these huge problems for the community. When you think about, your own time in Buffalo, how do you think about the changes that you've seen there and what's gone on?
Some of the changes are really unbelievable. Sometimes you don't realize the economic doldrums you're in until they lift.
Yeah,
and then you see just how things are so much better. So we had a period of probably 20 years where our housing value didn't even increase with inflation, and we just took that as the norm. That your $80,000 house, maybe in 20 years it'll be worth $90,000.
Right.
That was the norm, but now we're starting to see real escalation of housing prices. It still hasn't anywhere near caught up to the increases we didn't have. So next to other American cities, we're still very, very affordable. But for us, it seems like a really big increase. And that's just one indicator.
Yeah. And underneath that, there's obviously always like the economic changes that underlying it. One thing that struck me, when I was up in Buffalo a few months back, going around the city, my mother-in-law spent her childhood in Buffalo because her dad worked for Cargill. And so, I've always heard these stories about, the Cargill facilities there. And as we're going around the city, I saw these old, elevators that with Cargill on the side of them, but they're just a ruin now, right? They're kind of abandoned. And so you get that kind of, that economic dislocation, right? That underlies, why your house value hasn't gone up.
It's all tied in together. So, we had this, in 1950s and early 60s, the Buffalo's economy appeared to be a bulletproof economy. Often people thought of it as an envious economy, but we didn't realize how over-reliant we were on the industrial sector. So we had a very broad base industrial sector, which appeared safe, but little did we know that the entire industrial economy in America was going to change. And that's everything from shipping to grain production to chemicals, automobiles, steel, all those components we had in Buffalo, and they all substantially shrunk in a pretty short period of time. And that just had a tremendous ripple effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's striking, right? This is kind of, a microcosm of the American story of kind of economic growth and then dislocation, right? So, you saw that kind of heyday, the American economy in the 50s and 60s when, things were really strong, right? And then that massive dislocation that happened 70s, 80s, 90s on, right? So that, when you look around today, right, it's you can't understand the current situation without knowing that kind of history of what happens.
In some ways, we were the beneficiary of historic luck. So in 1825, we were in the right geographic place for the Erie Canal. But when the 50s and the 60s rolled around, we consider ourselves bad luck, but it was often, intentional governmental policy. So our grain industry disappeared with the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway system.
Right.
So it made the Erie Canal redundant. But then there was no plan ever for, well, how are we going to restore the economy that we just hurt? And then, even with our steel and auto industry, there was several trade pacts that weren't really that helpful to places like Buffalo. Before NAFTA, there was programs called the Maquiladora programs, where we had factories that employed just shy of 1,000 people. Picked up the entire factory and moved it to the Mexican side of the Texas Mexican border. But those were intentional trade policies, designed to generate overall economic growth. But it really had a severe impact on areas of the country that still haven't recovered.
Yeah, it's always interesting when we talk about it here in the academic setting, like a place like Cornell, right? Our economists will talk about the theory on trade, and the theory on trade is that it'll produce more gains overall, right? But there's also always the story that we know that there's going to be winners and losers, right? Some sectors and locales are going to be hit worse, and the country's going to be richer off. But then the economists always sort of wave hands at the end and say, but the winners can compensate the losers, right? That's always kind of the answer at the end, right? And it seems that's where you get that tension between kind of the academic idea of this happening and then, your world and the policy and the politics of, well, how do you actually do that, right? How do you, or even are you going to do that, right? You pass the trade pact, but then you don't provide whatever adjustment or support that's going to make sure that, overall everybody's going to come out better.
You're right. And in Buffalo, we talk about NAFTA. We still say, we like NAFTA if it had labor protection,
yep,
and environmental protection. So, how does a Buffalo plant compete with another locality that happens to be a different country that offers no workforce protections and also has no environmental regulations attached to it? Doesn't create an equal economic playing field.
Yeah, and then I think the other part of that is then what's the strategy for making sure that you have jobs in Buffalo as well, right? Good jobs.
Yeah, and that's really where Cornell and the ILR School have been particularly helpful to to upstate cities, especially Buffalo, trying to help us forge a path forward in this economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those tough tasks, right, that we've got to figure out where exactly it is that the potential is for new jobs and how to make those good jobs, right? I mean, that's always one of the tough questions is you can say, we'll create jobs. And if you look at the list of growing jobs projections, right, they tend to be a lot in the healthcare industry. Projections are, aging population. We know we have healthcare needs, but a lot of the growing ones are home healthcare aides and nursing assistants and jobs that tend to be, the least compensated amongst the health jobs and poor job qualities, right? So it seems like, we've got to both figure out, where we can get more jobs and make sure those are actually good jobs too.
And that's always the challenge, right? So the U.S. economy is really good at producing jobs. Unfortunately, more and more of those jobs are in the retail sector, and that sector is a sector that's been traditionally non-unionized. So there's been no wage pressure. So it's a whole sector of the economy that we've sort of written off as a low wage job, forever. One of the fastest growing parts of the economy for women in the workforce is pharmaceutical clerks. And that sounds like a pretty good job, but in reality, it's somebody stocking shelves at a Rite Aid in a pharmacy section. And that job generally pays, hovers, 10% above minimum wage.
Yeah.
Aren't really the types of jobs that we're looking for. But I guess we also have to remind ourselves a lot of how do jobs become high wage jobs in America. And often they become high wage jobs because they have collective bargaining agreements. The steel companies didn't come to Buffalo to provide high wage jobs. They came to Buffalo because we had a low wage immigrant workforce that they thought they could get a lot of work out of for very little money. But it was only through educating and bargaining that we're able to make those jobs into high wage jobs. And I wonder how much power is in the economy that's never realized because there's just not a lot of pressure to raise wages in so many parts of our economy.
Yeah, one of the things that's been really a surprise to me, to be honest, in the last few years is how the conversation around wages has come alive again. It seemed like we'd kind of forgotten wages as an issue for quite a while. And now, you see, political candidates supporting sectoral bargaining, right? The idea that maybe, we could have an industry-wide bargaining. We saw the minimum wage, the Fight for 15 campaign succeed, far beyond what I'd expected, right? That was sort of an example where it's almost the practice got ahead of the theory, right? We knew the research showed that this should be okay, shouldn't have the negative effect on jobs, but I didn't think it was going to be politically feasible. This was a big surprise to me.
Yeah, it was a real surprise too. As a member of the legislature, when we were actually able, to push that through and put it together, we quickly went from rhetoric to practice. But we've done a lot in Western New York to try to to improve the economic conditions. But that increase in the minimum wage, which in Buffalo it tops off not at 15 but at 12. That put like 25% more wages on people's tables.
Right.
And it really had a incredible impact in terms of reducing poverty, and then also the working poor. Suddenly you were able to afford to put a roof on your house. So these are the same jobs, but we essentially mandated that they pay about 25% more. We held our breath, but all the data is showing that we not only didn't lose jobs, but we actually gained jobs.
Yeah, and one of the things I found really interesting is that it seems like it has a knock-on effect, so that people above the minimum wage point, right, and unions with their contracts can then actually negotiate more because there's a higher floor, so they're not having to compete with that real rock bottom low wage type of business model.
I think you're absolutely right. You bring that floor up, then other companies have to respond to stay competitive. And I also, I subscribe to that theory of the increase in minimum wage is, it's fast money into the economy.
Yep.
That money doesn't go to investment funds. It doesn't go to long-term strategies. It goes right back out onto the street into the cash boxes of local stores and restaurants and retail establishments.
Yep.
It seems to be having a pretty positive effect.
Yeah, no, it's really great to see that. And, I think it opens up possibilities to think about, more policies like this that can have that real economic development impact. One of the things that's been interesting in the work we've been doing, particularly in Western New York, is this attempt to map out where it is that you can see potentials for really increasing job numbers. We've got some work we're doing around like the healthcare industry, trying to figure out, where we can get more access to employment. And particularly, there's a lot of groups that haven't had really good access to jobs in the past. You think people with disabilities, which, is a huge issue, criminal record, cutting people off from jobs, right? When we know that the best way to prevent somebody committing a crime again is to get them a job, right? And trying to figure out the spots where you can get that access.
And you see as the workforce is tightening, companies aren't objecting to the ban the box of not being able to ask about criminal behavior in the past. Companies are starting to drop some of their drug tests.
Yeah.
And then frankly, there are companies that probably didn't have the best track records with hiring people of color,
Yep.
are suddenly, recruiting in neighborhoods of color to try to bring people into the workforce. So it turns out a strong economy really does lift all boats at the
Yeah.
same time, and I think we're seeing that.
Yeah, and I think it opens up really new possibilities. I was thinking about one of the projects we're doing at ILR where we're looking at criminal records effects, and we've got people going into prisons looking at working with incarcerated individuals who are about to be released and doing education about jobs. And there's even a job fair that we've run in one of the facilities to try and connect people with jobs, right? And that's a sort of agenda that I think we wouldn't have been focused on 10 or 20 years ago, and I don't think was on the public policy agenda. The ban the box is something that's really picked up in just in the last few years, which is a hopeful thing, right? It's nice to see where public policy can make a difference in people's lives.
We remain optimistic that with good public policy, we can have positive impacts on people's lives and the economy at the same time. For often it was sold as this: you can have good public policy, but it's going to hurt your economy in the long run. But we're seeing a lot of these policies have what you call the knock-on effect of raising wages, or the fast money from minimum wage increases, and banning the box. They're all things that are good for the economy.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I think, in terms of the regional impact that these things have. Up here in upstate New York, right, we're in a region that's had this great economic history, but in recent years, we've had some tough times, and I think there's sometimes been a tendency to be, despondent about the possibilities, right? To think that things can't turn around, right? That it will make a difference, right? What we do.
And we also, I think, too, we become a little fear-based. So there was a lot of trepidation about increasing the minimum wage for fear of what it could do to our economy. So we're seeing these growths on most of our economic sectors. While we still lag behind the national average in most of them, it's better than we've done in 20 years. But I would say that we still don't fully trust it.
Yeah.
I think we need some more good years of good economy before we become accustomed to this as the norm. We still are a little wary, and we think perhaps the rug could be pulled out at any second. So we keep our fingers crossed, and we whistle when we go by graveyards.
That's right. There's we see it academically. There's a lag in the positive effects as kind of things pick up, right? People take a while to be convinced that things are moving in a positive direction, but I think we're starting to see those kind of some optimism around that, and I think that potential for policy interventions and thinking about a real kind of good long-term strategy seems to be there now.
I think it is. You referenced the healthcare economy before, so we're trying to grow their healthcare economy, but we're seeing there's a two-tiered economy in healthcare. So if you're in a hospital, you usually get a good wage. If you're with an insurance company that does health benefits, you get a good wage. But if you're providing anything around home healthcare, that's often a low-wage part of the health economy. So you have people doing very similar jobs in a hospital or in a home setting, but the people in the home setting often get paid substantially less money, even though it's cheaper usually on the system to keep people in homes as long as possible. But we have to look at policies to make sure that we're able to keep the wages of people who provide in-home care, to keep it high, because low wages we've figured out are really bad for our economy.
Yeah, and I think this is where some of the most interesting experiments with unions and collective bargaining have emerged. Right, if you look across the country, the increasing numbers of home healthcare workers who have union representation has been a real transformational effect. I mean, some of the biggest organizing successes have been in that industry.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You don't have to go back too far to look at just nurses in hospitals. So up until the 80s, most of those nurses in hospital settings were not unionized. They're all reunionized now, and undoubtedly all the nurses' wages have come up, but also the healthcare outcomes have come up at the same time. So once again, we were able to get this social policy of higher wages for nurses, simultaneously increasing the healthcare outcomes at the same time. So we have to get out of this thinking that it's sort of a zero-sum gains on these things. We can have real gains.
Yeah. I mean, you think about, who's going to be looking after your parent or yourself, in the future, and do you want that person to be, paid decently, have decent shift times, and be able to kind of live a good middle class kind of life? You think that person's going to be much more able to give you better care in that situation, or your loved one.
Yeah, I agree. People who are suffering under economic insecurity, often don't have the bandwidth then to go and provide care. They have too many other worries going on. So we would like them to have some of their worries lifted, and I think we would have better outcomes on that.
Yeah. One other thing that has been a real success from our standpoint here at the ILR School in relation to Buffalo is that we've got this High Roads program that brings Cornell students to Buffalo, working with community organizations and trying to make an impact in the local community that way. And we're hoping that that's something that is valuable for the local community in Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has. ILR has been in Buffalo since right after World War II, and what they've been able to bring to Buffalo lately is just really an outsider's view of optimism, but also reaffirming the outsider's view that Buffalo is a great place.
Yeah.
So with these High Road Fellows, we're able to bring these students in, to experience a 360 view of Buffalo, use their good skill set in their workforces, but I view them all as ambassadors who enjoy their time in Buffalo, will go on to do other things in other parts of the country, but they'll spread the gospel of Buffalo being a really a good place, often exceeding their expectations on all fronts.
Yeah, that's something I've really heard from the students. So you get some of the students who, are from the region and know it, but the really interesting ones are the ones who, might have grown up down in New York City, never really got to know this part of the state at all, and they get up to Buffalo and it opens their eyes. It really is a different kind of experience. We talk about, a period of kind of where, the country's more fractured than it's been in the past, and that idea of kind of getting our students out to see another part of the country, I think, is transformative.
Yeah, I think it's invaluable, and they really do get a complete view of Buffalo. I mean, they go to workplaces, they visit people in their homes, and they realize that, holy cow, this is a city with median housing price is about $150,000. Our commute time is about 15 minutes on average. Yeah. We have world-class art museums. We have the Buffalo Bills. We have the Buffalo Sabres, the University of Buffalo, and they get to see it all. But I think around America, there's many more cities like Buffalo than there are cities like New York City, in Los Angeles. So this is the economies that we're trying to improve, and we're representative of similar economies all across America that we're trying to figure out solutions for.
Yeah, it's really a great learning experience, right, to see that sort of practical thing of how the real economy works, and what it means in terms of local communities. I think the housing price thing is one of those great kind of contrasts, right? You're talking about the kind of housing costs that would get you maybe like a closet in New York City, right, to live in, that really opens the eyes.
And from an architectural perspective, the unintended consequence of having economic doldrums, from the 50s to recently was we didn't have a lot of large-scale demolitions of our historic structures. So throughout downtown, we have, beautiful buildings that in other economies probably would have been removed. We have neighborhood after neighborhood of houses built between 1900 and 1920. It looks picture perfect.
Yeah.
And you go inside the houses, and they're built with such a high level of craftsmanship from that period of time, and using wood that you can't really even get anymore. It's really it's mind-boggling to walk in some of these Buffalo houses and buildings to think that we still have it, and it's achievable, and to people of more modest means.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see what potential there is for as the economy picks up and as the community is being renewed, how you can build on that infrastructure. I mean, I think of that when I go to our ILR office in Buffalo, which is in this beautiful old, like 1900 building, and it's got that beautiful old skeleton to it. But then you go into the offices where they've renovated, and it's this beautiful modern open office within this amazing historical building. And, and I think, across that kind of, community skeleton of infrastructure for the old buildings there's enormous potential for kind of renovation and new building.
There is, and we recognize that as a strength. People want stuff that's tangible, and they call it real. This is real stuff.
Yeah.
And there's generations attached to it. And we try to catalyze that in New York State by the historic tax credit.
Yeah.
So the federal government has a historic tax credit, and then we match the federal government's with a separate New York State tax credit, and that's done wonders on redoing our old buildings. And we brought it right down to the neighborhood level. That if you're in a historic district, that putting a roof on your house qualifies you for a New York State historic tax credit. So it's gone from doing wonderful big buildings like the Market Arcade that you were referring to, the Lafayette Hotel, or just houses throughout neighborhoods. It really helped to catalyze investments and help to defray some of the costs associated with working on century-old building.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of how public policy makes a difference, right? And in areas that aren't the sort of sexiest areas of public policy, right? Zoning policy, right, isn't the sexiest issue, but it's one that affects people where they live. It affects communities, the landscape that we move through, and has these profound effects of the local economy and people's lived lives.
Yeah, it's wonderful when you can put policies to effect that you can see it coming out, whether it's the historic tax credit, the changes in the minimum wage, the brownfield tax credits, all these policies have an impact. And there is always a element of risk when you put together public policy. I mean, you rely on academics and folks from the ILR school to tell you, we think you're on the right track here.
Right.
Then we put them into place, and there's real life consequences of that. And more often than not, it's my opinion that we get it right. But I think we need to be bolder as we move forward, as we think of lifting the economies of the rest of the state. Let's face it, the only truly healthy city in all of New York State is New York City.
Yeah.
The Buffaloes, the Rochesters, the Syracuse, Albany, Utica, Binghamton, Elmira, they're all under tremendous strain. So we need to look at the different regions of our state, but also come up with policies that are designed, to intentionally kickstart our urban areas.
Yeah, and I think, on our side is the kind of university's perspective on it. We can come up with the ideas, but we don't know how they'll actually work until you guys put them into practice, and we can take a look at those policies and see, hey, this worked, that didn't, let's refine it a little bit, here's some new ideas, and we keep moving forward. But you've got to have the bold policies, you've got to try them out to see if they're going to work.
Yeah, I mean, the work of the ILR School in Buffalo, in the last 20 years, you folks did a report called Champions of Work, and
Yep.
You updated that report. And it all talked about the different types of jobs in our economy, and how the jobs and their impact differ based on their wage and benefit packages. So that really opened our eyes to this idea of we need to focus more on jobs that have the potential to pay a higher salary rate, and that's the jobs we should be focusing on. And I believe your school, coined the tag of high road economic development policies. But with the high road policy, you look at it, the job, all the way through. So we're going to subsidize a company. That company is going to come in. We look at the environmental impacts of that, and then we look at the workforce, the development that it'll need. But then, the type of job that will be created, the pay, and how long we think it'll last in the economy. So it really helped us change the way we think of things.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I mean, I think that's the core of our kind of mission as the ILR School, is that we're trying to come up with ideas that can be used in practice that really have impact improving people's lives and really helping communities. We are the New York State School of Industrial Labor Relations. We're the land-grant university for New York State. And so it's important that we do things that will have impact on the state and improve the lives of New York Staters.
Well, I think you're doing a good job, and it's certainly having a positive impact in the city of Buffalo.
Well, thanks, and it's really great having great partners in the Buffalo area. We really appreciate that, and being able to work with the leaders of the Buffalo community to have that positive impact in the local area.
Thanks so much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Work, exploring the future of work, labor, and employment. In our next episode, Dean Colvin talks with author John Gordon about leadership in the workplace. Again, thank you for listening, and learn more about ILR by visiting us on the web at ilr.cornell.edu.